Hello, welcome to the ILC Daily Show. Today is the fourth day of the International Labour Conference. My name is Martin Murphy. It's great to have you back on this show. Today we're outside the Human Rights Chamber at the Palais de Nación because the first one of the thematic discussions started this morning. It took place this morning. It has just finished. As you can see, some people are still coming out. It was actually on child labor, which, as you know, World Day Against Child Labor was yesterday, but we're continuing to celebrate it today. And with me today are two participants of the thematic discussions this morning, and also two colleagues who are youth advocates. We have Lina Natalie Alvarado Riaño from Colombia. Welcome, and Mara Khalil from Jordan. Welcome both, bienvenidos. I'm going to be talking to them. I'm going to ask questions in Spanish to Lina, and then I'll switch over to English with Mara. Mara, let me begin with you. You just took part in this discussion. How did it go for you, and what was your main message for the panel?
It was really great. I'm very grateful to have an opportunity to be able to discuss such thing and to be the voice of the people who don't have a voice, the children who are working, and me as a youth, as a young person, to be able to represent those kids is a very great pleasure for me, and I'm so happy to be here today.
Okay. And what was your main message to the panel?
My main message is the role of youth and young people in empowering those children who have no voice to be able to discuss with other people what is their needs and and to claim their rights. So us, the youth, we will be their voices, so we can get them the rights and make them happy again.
Thank you very much. Lina, ¿cómo estás? Bienvenida. Quería preguntarte también lo mismo, ¿cuál fue tu mensaje en esta discusión, ¿no? Y cómo fue para ti toda esta discusión? Y también que nos presentes a tu pequeña amiga que tienes aquí en mano, por favor.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Mi mensaje el día de hoy fue muy claro, o sea, tenemos que trabajar todos unidos, indiferente de la carrera, indiferente de la edad, todos debemos trabajar y llegar a un mismo objetivo, que es la educación. Solo a través de la educación podemos romper estas barreras de pobreza y sustentar que todos los niños y niñas en el país, en Latinoamérica, sean libres de todas las problemáticas que existen y que son y al cual se les han roto sus derechos, principalmente por ejemplo en Colombia, en donde muchos niños han sido reclutados por el conflicto armado, donde muchos niños están en la minería, en las minas de oro, de carbón, donde muchos niños son explotados y abusados sexualmente, por ejemplo en la costa, donde muchos niños han tenido que emigrar de sus territorios, dejar su campo, sus familias, todo lo que ellos conocen y con lo que culturalmente nacieron por el conflicto armado, entre otros problemas que pues hay en Colombia.
¿Y quién es esta niña que tienes en mano?
Bueno,
no sé si la podemos mostrar.
Sí. Bueno, Nana, ella se llama Nana. Nana es la puerta al jardín de la alegría de todos los niños. Ella es la que enseña y promueve los derechos de las niñas y niños en mi país y en Latinoamérica. Ella fue el primer trabajo que yo hice como voluntaria, yo soy voluntaria, y fue una fundación que se acercó a mí y dijo, necesito a alguien que nos ayude a promover. Yo no soy comunicadora social, no soy abogada, no trabajo en todo este mundo tan bonito de las humanidades. Yo soy artista, entonces a través del arte comenzamos a generar diferentes estrategias de comunicación, donde nació Nana, y con Nana lo que hicimos fue una campaña muy bonita hace 3 años, que fue una campaña que se llamó Trapitos con Amor, en donde todas las personas introducían un trapo pues para rellenarla, porque fue la muñeca de trapo más grande del mundo con el que batimos un Guinness World Records. Entonces todas las personas llenaban estos grandes baldes en donde metían los trapitos y como retribución nosotros hacíamos campañas en universidades, colegios, sectores económicos, económicos del país, empresas, entre otros, en donde les enseñábamos los derechos de las niñas y niños en nuestro país, sobre derechos humanos y sobre todo ese trabajo tan bonito que hacía en ese momento y que sigue haciendo esa fundación, que es la que coordina actualmente en Colombia la Marcha Global contra el Trabajo Infantil. Entonces acordémonos que la marcha fue una de las creadoras, la que impulsó los acuerdos de las peores formas de trabajo infantil en Ginebra, precisamente acá.
Exactamente, hace 20 años aquí en Ginebra, exactamente. Mara, let me come back to you. You represent the Children's Podium. Can you tell us what it is and what it seeks to achieve?
Yeah. As I said before, the Children Podium seeks to achieve to be the voice of the kids and to be to show the people that there are kids who are suffering in hazard conditions, that they should be rescued, and that's the main idea of the Children's Podium.
Okay, and where can people find more information about the Children's Podium?
The Children's Podium, in the ILO website, there are things about it, and they can actually just search about child labor. How it's very dangerous mentally and physically for the kids, and that's how you can help, I think.
Thank you. And just a reminder that we're live on Facebook. We're also live on the ILO website. If you want to know more about child labor, you can go on the ILO website. There's a whole a section on child labor where you can learn about the conventions on child labor, as well as the work that the ILO with its partner has been doing on the ground to promote the fight against child labor. Lina, hablemos un poco de educación. We're going to talk about education now a little bit. Tengo entendido que tienes una maestría, ¿no? que has estudiado en ingeniería, si no me equivoco. ¿Cuán importante es la educación a la hora de luchar contra el trabajo infantil?
Bueno, no es un cliché. La educación realmente, como te lo dije anteriormente, es el factor que nos ayuda a romper las barreras de pobreza. Entonces, te cuento que yo soy magíster por muchas becas, yo he sido becada toda mi vida. En Colombia la educación, para acceder a la educación es muy difícil, la educación es muy costosa, o sea, es tan costosa que es comparable con los valores acá en Europa. Entonces, ¿qué te puedo decir? La educación, a través de la promoción, del fortalecimiento, de talleres pedagógicos, de talleres de formación personal, podemos prevenir que estas situaciones de flagelo contra los derechos de las niñas y niñas se rompan, que no existan más. Podemos adicionar, dar formas, estrategias diversas, diferentes, para que los niños y niñas se formen en diferentes partes. Esto no es solo, digamos, un rompimiento, ni que descubramos un premio Nobel de Economía, un premio Nobel de Paz, un premio Nobel de Física ni de Química. Es realmente apoyar que los sueños de esas personitas se cumplan y que sean felices y que haya una construcción de sociedad y de humanidad, una evolución real y desarrollo real de lo que somos como especie.
Perfecto, thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. Vamos a hacer 2 preguntas más, one to each, una cada una. Mara, I wanted to ask you about the My Story or the Kisati Ana campaign. Yeah?
My Story is a campaign that was under the initiative of Initiative Against Child Labor. My Story or قصتي أنا is a puppet show that triggers public places like malls or parks, so we can reach to a bigger amount of people. It's a story about a child who leaves school to go work in a garage as a mechanic because of his friend. So this story shows the development and the circumstances of this issue and how it affected him mentally and physically until the teacher in school noticed. So this part shows how important it is to be involved in the child's life, whether it was the school or the parents. So this shows people who see this puppet show how it's important to ask their kids what's going on with their lives, preventing them from dropping out of school, because dropping out is the first step in getting involved in such things. And in My Story, we want to show people that maybe a word or an action can show a kid that he's in a really bad place, so he can wake up. It's like a wake-up call for him to get out of it and try to fight his environment so he can get out of it.
Thank you. Y Lina, quería preguntarte a ti sobre la campaña 100 millones para 100 millones. ¿De qué se trata?
Bueno, esta es una campaña creada por la Marcha Global contra el Trabajo Infantil. Es una campaña liderada por el Premio Nobel de Paz. 100 millones para 100 millones lo que quiere es la movilización más grande en el mundo de movilización de los jóvenes. Y estos jóvenes, ¿por qué se van a movilizar? Se van a movilizar por erradicar el trabajo infantil y por volcar todos los niños a la educación. Una manera precisamente de que sean libres y que cumplan los sueños que tengan en sus mentes, en sus ideales. Nosotros trabajamos bajo 3 formas. La primera es trabajar con los líderes sociales, con los líderes políticos. Entonces trabajamos con todas las personas que estén en la política y que apoyen y que creen políticas públicas. Entonces lo que hacemos es trabajar con ellos para hacer un proceso de veeduría, un proceso de control, un proceso de formar también otras políticas públicas en torno precisamente a erradicar el trabajo infantil y que todos los niños se vuelquen a la educación. Trabajamos con los jóvenes, digamos que esto es el mayor objetivo de la campaña, jóvenes para empoderarlos, jóvenes para que ellos a su vez se lleven este discurso y lo trasciendan en sus territorios, ¿sí? Y a su vez en sus territorios a otros territorios. Y lo último es un cambio de actitudes, porque precisamente en la charla hablaban de que nosotros no sabemos qué estamos consumiendo y tal vez lo que consumamos fortalezca a las empresas precisamente en el trabajo infantil. Entonces es generar una serie de sensibilización a través de talleres, actividades, simposios y bueno, diferentes formas para comunicar, divulgar y sensibilizar el trabajo infantil. Entonces eso es lo que hace 100 millones, eso es lo que hacemos en Colombia. 100 millones no solo es Colombia, es una campaña directamente de la India y a su vez en Latinoamérica estamos trabajando en 4 países que son Brasil, Chile, Perú y Colombia, que fue la última que se adhirió a la campaña. Entonces comenzamos este semestre y pues estamos trabajando en ello.
Perfecto. Lina, muchas gracias. Mara, great to meet you both. Thank you very much. We're going to go over there now. So if you come with me, Alyosha, you'll see that, I don't know if we can show, the children's choir has just finished performing inside the Human Rights Chamber. And we're going to walk over here and show you the exhibition area, which is actually the one that we showed yesterday. Let's see if we can get away from the kids. Let's see. Hello, you're live on TV. Hello, hello, hi, hi. You're live on ILO TV. Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. So those are the kids who just performed inside the Human Rights Chamber. And here, if you remember, if you were watching yesterday, this is the exhibition area outside of room 20 for the different thematic panels. This will be on until the end of the ILC. So if you're at the Palais de Nación and would like to come and take a look at the different thematic panels that we have interactive panels as well. It's very interesting, so please come and take a look. Now let me hand it over to Sophie, who's downstairs in the studio, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you to Lina and Mara, 2 youth child labour advocates. Welcome back to the Daily Show studio. We are live from the Centenary International Labour Conference in Geneva. As Martin was saying, the first of the ILC's thematic forums got underway this morning. It's focusing on the issue of child labour. There will be a total of 7 thematic forums during the course of this conference. Representatives of governments, workers and employers' organisations took part in the thematic forum this morning, along with child labour activists who also took to the floor.
Ever since the creation of our organisation, the elimination of child labour has been a top priority. If you look back, you'll see that 2 of the first 6 conventions that were adopted by the ILO addressed exactly this issue. And I've looked back at the history books. I can find the first recorded piece of regulation against child labour, it's actually from my own country, there may be others, dates back to 1802. So we're not doing something new here. We'd all like to believe that we're moving forward towards the end of a very long struggle, but aware that a lot still remains to be done.
Okay. To mark World Day Against Child Labour, the global music star Rita Ora has sent a special video message. Let's hear what she had to say.
This year we are celebrating the centenary of the International Labour Organization. In a rapidly changing work scenario, we need to make sure that children are not at work but in school. Let me wish the ILO a wonderful century ahead.
That was the singer-songwriter Rita Ora with her message for World Day Against Child Labour. And we also had music at this morning's forum on child labour. A children's choir from the Les Couverts School in Geneva contributed with a mini-concert for delegates. Before they went on, my colleague Adam Bowers got a sneak peek of their show and spoke to some of the children.
Okay, ready for the next one? Yes?
Tell us a little bit more about the choir.
Yes, so the choir are coming to sing. They've been involved in a project together with many other schools in Geneva. There was a project by the Don du Coeur, and it's for raising some funds to help expand music schools in a slum area in Mexico. When I heard about the project, I thought it had very similar links and a similar spirit to what we're trying to do with our Scream music project. So Scream is about empowering children and young people to take action in their communities, to raise awareness about child labour, to help support music education for children as a way to prevent child labour and to keep children in school.
Wonderful.
And so we saw these links and we thought it would be great if they could be part of us for the World Day.
Yinka, nice to meet you, Yinka, and Charlotte. Okay, brilliant. So thank you for joining us, Yinka, Nelia and Charlotte. You're part of the choir that's singing today. You're practicing for the event on the 13th. Can you tell me what school you're from?
La Découverte.
La Découverte, okay. And why are you here today?
For helping children. We're gonna sing for the Day of Child Labour.
Okay. So you're going to sing as a choir on the 13th together?
Yes.
And what are the two songs that you're going to sing?
I will sing Million and I will sing.
Okay. And you just mentioned, who are you singing for?
For the children that have child labour.
Okay, so for children who are in child labour, we're singing for them and we want to get them out of child labour and into education, is that right?
Yes.
So they can be at school like you?
Yes.
And I can see all your classmates are joining you behind. Give us a wave. Excellent. Good luck everyone on the 13th. I'm going to come and watch you. A small TV, yes, yeah, on our website. Thank you everyone and good luck on the 13th. Bye-bye.
Yes, I sing, 'cause I know how it feels to be free.
Oh yeah!
I think you're ready.
That was the children's choir. That it's the same choir that performed this morning in the first thematic discussion on child labor. Now, as every day, we want to bring you some of the images of our global tour. This was the big event that took place across the world on April 11th. 24 offices, 24 locations in over 24 hours. If you want to watch the whole event, it's still you can find it in the ILO website, ilo.org. But for now, we want to bring you highlights of two of those events. These are the events that took place in Amman and Beirut.
كثير وراه فمش عم بقدر اشوفه. اروح 24 70 شو رايكم؟ اروح 24 70 بدي اللينس. يس يس.
سنابل هلي هلي فوق بيادرنا، هلي تعبنا تعبنا وشقينا وتوفقنا ولقينا شفنا مروج الخير بموج وترقص حول سواقينا
تعبنا تعبنا وشقينا وتوفقنا ولقينا شفنا مروج الخير تموج وترقص حول سواقينا
تعبنا تعبنا وشقينا وتوفقنا ولقينا شفنا مروج الخير بموج وترقص حول سواقينا تعبنا تعبنا وشقينا وتوفقنا وشقينا شفنا مروج الخير بموج وترقص حول سواقينا سواقينا
كل شي وطني بيلبقلو نسمات والخضرا مضواي والثلج ملبس فرقلو ولولا تأخر منها حكاية كل شي وطني بيلبقلو نسمات والخضرا مضواي والثلج ملبس فرقلو لولا تأخر منها حكاية بيبقى بقلبي وعم بشتاق له بعرف من دعساته جاي 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 بدو يرجع بكرة غيابه بإيده الحلوة يفتح بابه ويعلق على عتب الزينة والزينة تطوي بالغابه وجوه الغابه بتخليني ركع صوتي فوق ترابه لبنان الجاي ما بينسيني خبيته بقلبي بسنيني خباني وردي بكتابه
That was some of the highlights from the ILO's global tour that took place in April. Those were from Amman and Beirut. Just a reminder that you're watching The Daily Show live from the ILO's Centenary Conference in Geneva. If you want to send us any comments about the show or any questions for any of our guests, please use the hashtag ILO100 or OIT100. You can see it behind me here on the screen. We'd love to hear from you. And in particular, if you've got any questions or comments about tripartism or freedom of association and collective bargaining. Later on in the show, we've got a couple of extra special live guests, and we can put maybe some of your questions to them. Now, it's time to hear from the first of our dispatches from our correspondents around the conference. Marco Minocri has been speaking to one of the employers' representatives from Mexico about his thoughts on World Day Against Child Labour.
Bueno, la OIT se ha preocupado desde su creación por los derechos universales, por el bienestar social, y pensando en esto es muy importante que tengamos en consideración que el futuro del trabajo y el futuro del mundo está en manos de los niños. Por ende, tenemos que cuidar a esta gran potencia o gran potencial que tiene el mundo, que son los niños, y que evitando su explotación y teniéndolos formando en educación, no en trabajo, tendremos un mundo mejor y un mundo mucho más equilibrado y con un futuro más prometedor. Bueno, es positivo siempre todo lo que tenga que ver con la erradicación de la explotación infantil, es positivo, podría llegarse a ratificar y sería interesante. México cuenta ya con una legislación que regula y protege a los niños y no permite el trabajo de los niños y de menores de 16 años sin la supervisión, y hay una edad en la que definitivamente está totalmente prohibida el trabajo de menores. Claro, dado nuestro país y las circunstancias sociales de nuestro país, en el campo sobre todo, los niños trabajan y tienen que apoyar en su casa para el desarrollo económico, que no es lo óptimo, pero son circunstancias que se dan y se tienen que dar por la situación precaria de las familias. Pero lograr erradicar el trabajo infantil debe ser una meta, no solamente del OIT, sino del mundo entero, porque, insisto, son el futuro del mundo y tienen que irse formando libres de presión, libres de contaminación, libres de situaciones que presionen a los niños para tener un futuro realmente prometedor en el mundo. Mientras haya niños en el mundo, tendremos una esperanza de un mundo mejor.
That was our colleague Marco Minocri speaking to an employer representative here at the ILC about the issue of child labor. Now, as every day, we'll like to bring you a story about the work that the ILO does around the world, and we're going to stay on the issue of child labor. This is a project that we have in Zambia on eliminating child labor. Let's take a look.
The long road that Musole Fufu walks with her uncle and 6-year-old brother is not the road to school. They are crossing a field to find the underground coal fires that her uncle lit a few days earlier. Barefoot in the humidity and dust, she and her brother dig and pick up pieces of charcoal which by the end of the day fill bags that weigh 25 kilos. Her uncle Mike will sell the bags along the road for just a few dollars each. Kauma region in the western part of Zambia is known for its tobacco plantations. While waiting for the harvest season, children spend their free time working in the production of charcoal or picking caterpillars out of the trees, which are then cooked and dried in the sand. Other children work for hours carrying heavy cans of water to tend the small seedlings in the tobacco nurseries that will soon be planted. Children like Mubila Niglish come to this waterhole twice a day.
I am watering the seed beds to help my family and to get food. I don't like to do this. During the harvest season, often I drop out of school to help them cut the tobacco leaves. Once I injured my leg offloading a tobacco bag from a cart.
The International Labour Organization has set up the Arise project as part of its international program for the elimination of child labour, to reduce child labour in tobacco-growing communities of Zambia. With funding provided through a public-private partnership, The ILO set up local commissions called District Child Labor Committees, or DCLCs, to have an integrated approach to tackling the problem in the most vulnerable communities in the region.
We work on awareness raising, capacity strengthening, and then also the actual direct interventions to identify the children at risk and those already engaged in various forms of child labor. Work with those structures on the ground, because these are the ones who continue with the monitoring and ongoing support to those children and families where they are coming from.
The Ministry of Labour and Social Security, which has an office in Kaoma and Kema, works very closely with DCLC members. So when they do the regular inspections, we either on the farms or in the workplaces, wherever we have found cases and issues of children being involved in hazardous forms of work, inspections are done. And where withdrawals have been conducted, we go there to verify, to ensure that it is true that these children are no longer there, are no longer working.
The program helps local communities train former child laborers through apprenticeships in masonry, carpentry, animal husbandry, agriculture, and sewing. Hundreds of children have already been trained, and thousands more have been educated about the risk and dangers that work in the tobacco fields pose to their health and development. Self-help groups have been created, and nearly 200 families have received microloans to help them launch small income generating activities. Febi Kahali worked several years in the tobacco fields and never managed to finish her schooling. But thanks to the Arise program, here at the Youth Resource Center of Kaoma, she is now being trained to cultivate and manage fish or chicken farms. These skills have given new meaning to her life.
So in the future I want to become a very big farmer. Yes, even to join in the companies, and I can help my parents.
Through the Arise program, the ILO organizes community theater and musical events in schools with students and their parents. They are designed to point out the dangers that child labor poses for children's health and to raise awareness about how important education is for their future.
In the beginning, it was a bit hard. The parents were finding it difficult. They were mad at us, but today they understand, because we even call them and we have meetings with them to educate them on the usefulness of their children being in school. So we are telling them this is a program that will sustain your child. It's an everlasting program that will benefit the entire family, not just the child.
The road to eliminating child labor in Zambia is a long one. But thanks to the ILO's Arise program, children from all over Kaoma are finding their way out of the fields, back to school, to a better future.
That was a look at the ILO's work on eliminating child labour in Zambia. And let's stay with the theme of child labour a little longer. The ILO's objective is to get children out of the workplace and into education. Yesterday, my colleague Adam Bowers spoke to a former child labourer, Molly Namarembe, about her experiences and her life since then, working as a project coordinator for the ILO's SCREAM project.
Hello, today is World Day Against Child Labour, the 12th of June, and I'm joined by Molly Namarembe, who is a SCREAM trainer in Uganda. She works for the Somero NGO, which is working with ILO funding to help end child labour in the country. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you just told me your name, Namarembe, I beg your pardon, it means peace.
Yes, it means peace, and I'm working for peace in the lives of children.
Great.
Yeah.
Could you tell us also what SCREAM means? What is the SCREAM project?
Okay, SCREAM is supporting children's rights through education, the art and media. It's an ILO methodology that we use to support and empower children to be able to take active participation in their own rights. So we support the children to be able to fight for their rights, to advocate for good policies, to use the community structures, to be empowered to stay in school and fight child labour.
Excellent, thank you. Now you're here at the International Labour Conference. It's the Centenary Session of the International Labour Conference. Why are you here this year?
I am here for two reasons. One, I am a scream trainer, so I want to come here and share my effort towards the elimination of child labor in Uganda. And two, I am a former child laborer who was exploited in my childhood, and I am here to share my story so that some people can be inspired, that children out there who are still in exploitation can get hope that one day something will work out and life will change.
Thank you. And as you explained, you're a former child labourer, also your sister, and you both worked on a farm as you were growing up.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit about your experience in your early years?
I want to say it was only 2 years of exploitation, but it dominates all that I can remember about my childhood because it involved a lot of pain. One, it involved working for long hours. We would wake up at 6 and work until the end of the day, no resting, sometimes on an empty stomach. And all this happened after the death of our parents. My mom died when I was about 11 years old, and my sister was 14. It was so hard for us to cope up, and we stayed in a child-headed family for about 3 years, with us taking care of ourselves. The only thing we knew how to do was work on a tea plantation, because that's what our mom used to do. So we took it up with my sister, working full-time so she can collect more money to support me. I personally used to work part-time. So I would wake up very early in the morning, pick a few baskets of tea, and then go to school, come back in the evening, transport the plucked tea to the store. It was so hard, I won't say a bit, it was really hard. It involved waking up in the morning dew with a lot of cold, carrying heavy baskets. I still live with back pain until today because the way you pluck off tea is you tie a basket around yourself and whatever you pick, you put in the basket. So you have it around your chest the whole day. And that's what we went through. I was only 11 years old and my sister was only 14, but we had to fend for ourselves. And my sister couldn't continue with education because she was older than me. So she took up the mother role, and until today I thank her for what she did. I don't know how to pay her, but every time I look at her, I see my mother. I see someone who sacrificed a lot to see that I survive. It may not have been easy, but along the time, one thing that I remember is the pain, the fatigue without rest. And even after a long day, you still have to continue with the same the following day. And nobody cares. And people used to applaud us for being hardworking, for being able to take care of ourselves. They never minded about the exploitation we were going through. They never cared about our future. And for me, now that when I see other children going through what I survived, it makes me sad. It makes me want to cry, and that's why I want to dedicate my whole life to protecting children from child labor. Because it's bad. Brings a lot of pain. I have so many injuries, so many scars from the insect bites, inhaling the pesticide when they are spraying, and nobody cares. As long as you do a lot, the more you work, the more money they give you. And what makes me sad is that even the money that comes out of child labor doesn't really impact on the lives of those suffering. I used to work every day, but it was never enough to pay for my school fees. And I remember even during the time of our work, I had to drop out for one school term because I had to collect money to join another level of education. So it brings a lot of pain, and what I know is that even when the exploitation ends, the memories stay, the pain stays. Even now that I am not a child laborer, every time I remember, I just want to break down because it was too painful. I don't wish that any child ever goes through the same.
Thank you for sharing that with us, first of all. It's an incredibly moving story. It's hard sometimes to imagine. Most people don't experience this kind of experience that you've had through your life, and as you say, it's something that will stay for you for your life as well. So incredibly moving for us to hear. It's an experience that stayed with you, but it also sounds like you've used it as an inspiration also to grow stronger, and also a real determination to help others. To ensure, because today now there are child labourers around the world. The ILO is working hard to eradicate child labour with its partners around the world, but it still exists. Yeah. So you've really now dedicated your life to helping others and helping eradicate child labour.
Yes, and that's what I pledge to do. I want to share what my turning point, that 3 months that I missed going to school. I kept thinking, for how long am I going to mourn my mother? Because all that we used to do is wake up, go to the farms, pick tea as we cry. But when I missed school for 3 times, I realized it's not going to help to keep crying. So that's when I started to look out for which structures can help me. So I knew a few friends of my mother while she was alive. I went out to look for them, and they told me they knew my father's family, because for me, my whole life, it was my mother. My father died before I was even a year old, so I only knew my mother. So I started looking out through the friends of my mother. They supported me to look for my father's family, and that's where I landed on to an uncle. But even before that, when I was in school, my teachers liked me because I was a bright student. But the more I missed school because I was involved in child labor, the more my performance declined. So I took it upon myself to keep talking to my teachers why my performance was declining, because at first they didn't understand me. They thought maybe I was becoming lazy. They didn't know the situation back home. So I talked to them and told them my situation, and that's when they helped me to finish primary school. Now after primary is when I dropped out, and it was a turning point for me because I had a dream. I really wanted to study until the university. And I kept telling myself, sitting here and crying is not going to help me. So when I looked out for my mother's friends, they connected me to an uncle of mine who was a brother to my late father. And he's the one that took me up first, and then later on we picked my sister. Unfortunately, it was too late for her to go back to school because she had missed for a long time. So you see, even when I see that she does not have a job to do today because she didn't go to school because of child labor, I feel she's also my responsibility too. But now that she's old, what about the children I left behind? Because there are so many of them. We were about 50 children on the farm, and I left everybody else behind, which is painful.
I can't imagine the pain that you have for that. You showed determination to get out of the situation you were in. And like you say, all of those children have dreams too. And child labour is robbing children of those dreams, of their situation at present, but also for their future. But as you say, that was a real turning point in your life. You said to yourself, look, I'm not going to let this ruin the rest of my life. I want to get back into education. And something that's so important to get children out of child labour into education, so that your future dreams can come real. And we meet you today here. You're inspiration to me, inspiration to everyone that's watching the programme. And you're working now selflessly to help other children because I guess of what you've experienced and what you've seen.
Yes.
So could you tell us just a little bit more about your work in Uganda?
My work started in 2015 when I was still a university student. I went to Somero, Uganda to do my internship. And when I reached there, I found the founder of Somero, Uganda, who is Mr. Nsubga Geoffrey. He's a scrim trainer for the International Labour Organization. So when I met him, I realized he's doing a very good job in the lives of children who are going through a suffering that I know of, that I have experienced before. So I started volunteering with him without a pay, and I stayed with him for my whole university life as a volunteer. So together with him, we would move places, we would go to the children in the gold mines, we would handle the children in the slums of Kampala, the capital city of Uganda, who are also going through a lot of abuse without anywhere to sleep, and the only job they can do is collect scrap. I was touched because it's something that I had gone through. So I stayed to work with him because he saw my determination and the fact that I really wanted to do that. He gave me a job. But I don't do this just because it's paying me. I do it because it is my passion. And I go an extra mile. And I can promise you, as long as I can survive, I will still do it.
And now here you are at the global level at the International Labour Conference, and tomorrow you will speak at an event in our thematic forums that are taking place tomorrow morning here, and they'll be broadcast live. You can visit that on www.ilo.org. What will be your message to the forum tomorrow?
My message to the forum tomorrow is not so different from what I have said. It is that we are in very different capacities as stakeholders. We have the international actors, we have the national actors back home, we have the presidents, we have the people working in civil society, we have the UN. Everybody in your capacity, if you can do what you are supposed to do in your capacity, every child has a right, every child has an opportunity to live without exploitation. If you're a parent, do your role. If you're a child, do your role. Be at school, take part in that education, and be there. If you're a policy maker, make those policies and implement them. If you are an international body and governments have ratified so many conventions, so many laws, hold them accountable to their implementation. If everybody takes their role, if everybody plays their role, we can have a world free from exploitation of children.
So it's not somebody else's job.
It's not.
Everyone has a responsibility. Everyone can take an action.
Yes.
Well, I tell you what, you're speaking tomorrow, the room will be engaged, and you have a powerful, powerful story to tell and a really strong message. I thank you so much for sharing it with us today. It's a really emotional thing to share, and certainly it's touched me, and I'm sure it's touched those watching. So thank you very much. Thank you for being such an inspiration, and thank you for your work.
That was our colleague Adam Bowers talking to Molly Namarembe from the SCREAM project. If you're joining us just now, we're live on ILO.org. We're also live on Twitter. It's the 4th day of the International Labour Conference, and we're live here at the ILC Daily Show. If you'd like to send us any questions or any comments that you have, please do so via Twitter using the hashtag ILO100 or in Spanish and French, OIT100. Now we'd like to bring you the second one of our dispatches from our correspondents, our colleague Diya Banerjee. She caught up with a government representative from India to talk about his message on World Day Against Child Labour.
India ratified ILO core conventions on child labour and has been constantly working to make sure our precious children have a beautiful childhood where they are with their parents in the schools and ready to fly. India firmly believes in a world of work that is fair, dignified and responsive to changes. We will make all our efforts to ensure that India becomes a shining example of a country that offers peace and protection to our children. Children are our future and they need us.
That was a report from our colleague Diya Banerjee. Now, tripartism is at the heart of the ILO's structure and its work. Governments, workers and employers come together to draft all our international labour standards, such, for example, as Convention 182 on the worst forms of child labour. In a moment, we'll be talking a little more about tripartism with our special studio guests. But before we do that, let's learn a little more from this video which was made by ACTRAV, the ILO's Bureau for Workers' Activities.
And when these three keys turn together, when governments, employers and workers are able to come together, doors open and social justice advances.
The ILO is the only international organization in which governments and workers and employers' representatives have an equal voice in its decision-making. This concept is known as tripartism. Because of tripartism, the ILO can make use of real-world knowledge about employment and labor issues in its work. Since 1919, the ILO has responded to the needs of people everywhere for decent work, livelihoods, and dignity. Who is the driving force behind the setting up of the ILO? Discover the story of the workers' group. Over 100 years ago, the voice of workers was struggling to be heard. The Industrial Revolution had restructured the world of work, and it provided great riches for the few and global dominance for a number of Western nations. The growing working class had to live daily with poverty, inequality, and discrimination. It was usual to find children working in factories and fields. Workplace accidents and deaths increased with industrialization, mining, and transport. Then came the war in 1914. The First World War left countries and economies in ruins. People were traumatized by the violence, and the voices of those who had worked behind the front lines were clamoring to be heard, and revolutions broke out. When the First World War finally came to an end in 1918, the disenchantment of the workers brought the whole of Europe to the brink of revolution. Workers demanded that the peace settlement should include measures to ensure fairer working conditions, promoted through international labor standards and trade union rights. The social situation was so explosive that one of the main concerns of the Paris Peace Conference was to deal with unrest so great that the peace and harmony of the world are imperiled. This statement opens the preamble to the ILO's constitution and sets the stage for the creation of a permanent tripartite organization for labor. The ILO, bringing together governments, workers, and employers' representatives, was created in 1919 through Part 13 of the Versailles Peace Treaty to ensure peace by promoting social justice. A key actor of tripartism is the workers' group of the ILO governing body. Today it has 33 members that are elected every 3 years by all worker delegates at the International Labour Conference. For 100 years, the workers' group of the ILO governing body has defended the interests of workers across the world. The composition of the workers' group reflects regional and gender balance, as well as a mix of developed and developing countries. The voice of the workers' group has been critical during some of the most important historical moments of the ILO. Resistance to Nazism. In 1933, the workers' group refused the accreditation of the Nazi German workers' delegate, which led to Germany leaving the ILO. Decolonization. Workers' delegates contributed to the adoption of the Declaration of Philadelphia, which recalled that all human beings, irrespective of race, creed, or sex, have the right to pursue both their material well-being and their spiritual development in conditions of freedom and dignity, of economic security and equal opportunity. Struggle against the apartheid regime. Workers' delegates played an important role at the ILO in the combat against apartheid in South Africa. 1964, adoption of the Declaration on Apartheid. The International Labour Conference unanimously adopted the declaration concerning the policy of apartheid, condemning the South African government's racial policy, followed by a continuously updated action program. The workers' group especially supported the democratic trade unions of South Africa in their struggle and transition. And finally, the victory over apartheid came early 1990, after which Nelson Mandela attended the ILC, where he paid tribute to the ILO. The establishment of democracy in Poland. In 1980, shipyard workers in Poland went on strike for an independent trade union and respect of freedom of association. Workers' delegates played a key role in defending the rights of the trade union Solidarność, led by Lech Walesa. A commission of inquiry concluded that Poland had violated the Freedom of Association Convention No. 87. 1982. The ILO gave its full support to the legitimacy of the Solidarność Union, which launched the first independent, self-governing trade union in the then Eastern Bloc. This opened the door to the return of democracy. The end of the Cold War. The disintegration of the Soviet Union between 1990 and 1991 ends the Cold War. Globalization. In 2008, the ILO Declaration on Social Justice for a Fair Globalization is adopted. The declaration expresses the contemporary vision of the ILO mandate in the era of globalization. Today, the world of work is changing faster than ever before, and ensuring the voice of workers is heard is more important than ever. Strong unions are the safeguard of democracy. Many of the problems the world faces, from gross inequality to boom and bust economic cycles, can be alleviated by strong unions. As we look towards the future, we must remember that the future is not predetermined. Technology, demographics, or climate change alone will not decide our future. It's up to us to ensure we fight for the future of work that we want.
We have a remarkable 100 years history of achievement. We live at a time of unprecedented, transformative change at work. With the vision of the ILO's founders, described by some as a wild dream of securing peace through social justice, it is surely not beyond our capacities to build the future of work that we want, a future with decent jobs for all.
That was the ILO's Director General, Guy Ryder, ending that video created by ACTRAV. And joining us now is the Director of the ILO's Bureaus for Workers' Activities, Maria Henria Andre, and Kari Tapiola, former ILO Deputy Director General. Welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us on The Daily Show. Now, Kari has just completed a new book on tripartism called The Driving Force, Birth and Evolution of Tripartism, the Role of the ILO's Workers' Group. Kari, would you like to... Here it is, the book itself. Kari, since you're now obviously quite an expert on the subject, can you give us a quick explanation of the importance of tripartism in the ILO?
Well, tripartism is what keeps the ILO going. But what I've been trying to explain here is that what actually keeps tripartism going is the workers' group. The role of the workers' group is the driving force. And, you know, the name of this book, Driving Force, I decided on it because almost everyone with whom I talked, and I asked them, how would you characterize the role of the workers' group in the ILO throughout the history? Almost everyone said, well, that's the driving force. So I'm trying to explain why.
So we hear a lot about the driving force, and tripartism is established through the ILO, has been for 100 years, but how did it start? It was such a revolutionary idea in 1919.
Well, I think it started really on the very first governing body meeting where there was an election of the Director General of the ILO, and this was back in November 1919, and where Albert Thomas was the candidate. And instead of going directly to a vote, both the employers and the workers' group have asked for separate meetings with their constituents before having this vote. So I think that was the first signal that we were going to have a tripartite organization with very specific and clear roles for employers, workers, and governments, but where the decision-making process would start first in each one of the respective groups before coming to the collective decision.
Kari, you actually answered my first question, which was why is it called Driving Force? And I'm going to show the book again. It's actually available on the ILO's bookshop, so if you'd like to order it, please go to the ILO website and you can do so. You explained just now the why it's called Driving Force. What were some of the other things that the workers told you when you were trying to come up with ways of describing the role of the workers' group?
Well, you see, the answer to the question why are the workers the driving force is that if you look at what happened in 1919, as part of the Versailles Peace Treaty, an organization was put up, a tripartite organization. But basically the constitution of the ILO did not say what this ILO should be doing. And the contents of the work of the ILO, as outlined already in the first constitution, the contents came from proposals made by the international trade unions between 1916 and 1919. And the whole idea that the peace treaty should actually have workers' clauses comes from Léon Jouot, the French labor leader.
A lot of reaction to that proposition at the time, or was there opposition to that? You know, when
No, there was really no opposition. The employers were not in the same way part of the negotiations, and at one stage the employers said that, well, this was an unsolicited gift for us and we didn't quite know what to do with it. But then they also realized that tripartism has certain advantages, not only for the workers, but for the employers. And of course for the governments, the advantage is that if the two sides of industry between whom the conflicts of interest are really the biggest, if the two sides can agree, so then that guarantees peace and guarantees also economic prospects.
We're live on Twitter as well as on the ILO website, and we just received a question through Twitter. I want to put it to you, Marilena, if that's all right. It says, labor union membership is on decline in many countries in Europe and North America. Why is that happening, and is it a threat to tripartism?
Well, I think that we say that so many times that there is the perception that unions are now weak organizations, non-representative. I cannot agree with that statement. It is clear that in today's world, because of the changes we have in the labor market and in the societies, we have moved from very collective-oriented to very individual-oriented societies, and that is also reflected in the way work is organized and the work organization is organized and labor is organized. So there is not this automatic joining of a trade union which we had in the past. Does not mean that unions are no longer representative or that they are weak. I think they have a huge challenge if we are putting that together with the discussions on the future of work we're having at this conference as to how can trade union organizations today tap all those workers that traditionally do not join a trade union organization because they are on a non-standard form of employment or because they don't have a standard contractual arrangement. So because they work in the cloud, the platform work, the gig economy. I think that's what workers' organizations need to do. It's to see how are they going to bring those workers into the trade union organizations. They still have a very big strength in the traditional sectors. The question is, how do we tap the potential in the new sectors of the economy? And that, of course, implies unions having to use a different language than they would use for the more traditional workers in the traditional sectors. Unions having to adjust their communication techniques and their communication strategies in order to have a language that is easily understood. But first and foremost, unions bargaining and negotiating, be it on the tripartite level or on the bipartite level through collective agreements, in order to guarantee the rights for those workers, no matter where they are, no matter what their contractual arrangement is, they have to have an equal treatment and they have to be protected. I mean, in the end of the day, that's the universal labor guarantee that has been proposed in the report of the Global Commission on the Future of Work. And I do hope that this is going to be one of the strong conclusions coming out of the ILO Centenary Declaration. But then I do hope that trade unions, employers and governments will be able to implement those principles at the national level.
But, you know, it's tough being a trade unionist in the field, and a lot of them have problems at local level. What can the ILO do, and what has the ILO done in the past to protect the work of trade unions on the ground?
Well, a great part of the work that the ILO has been doing is, in fact, to strengthen the capacity of trade union organizations. There are preconditions for that work to be done. Trade union organizations have got to be strong, they have to be autonomous, they have to be independent. That's the framework conditions for a trade union to be able to operate at the national level, at the sectorial level, at the interregional level. It depends. The ILO has had, over the years, very strong programs in order to develop the capacities of trade union organizations in terms of their collective bargaining techniques and capacities, in terms of their need to be efficient, effective, and to have good proposals to put on the table when you are negotiating on the tripartite or on the bipartite basis. But there's one thing which is also fundamental, and that is the trust between the three parties, the trust between the governments, the unions, and the employers' organizations, and the fact that, as we were saying before, in today's societies, there is such a big evolution as to how the development models of the countries need to be established, that it is completely unrealistic to think that that can be done without the biggest force of any society, which is its workers. So preparing the trade unions to be able to sit at the tripartite table, to discuss things which move beyond the pure discussion on the labor codes, for instance, but to discuss on what is the strategic development model of societies today, is part of the work that the ILO is doing with trade union organizations, and I'm sure that in the context of the 2030 development agenda and also in the context of the decent work agenda, we will be able to contribute to capacitating the unions to fully play their role.
Okay. Looking to the future now, we hear a lot about the gig economy, we hear a lot about how work is fragmenting. How, in those circumstances, can we strengthen social dialogue so that the voices of workers can still be heard?
Well, social dialogue is the key to moving forward the development of our societies. I think that if we look back over the last 100 years, as we were saying at the outset, the promotion of tripartism, social dialogue, and I would add collective bargaining, which is sometimes thought as an old-fashioned instrument, but it is still the most important instrument that workers and employers have within their reach to regulate the functioning of the labor market. Those are the key starting points in order to make sure that the future of work is a future of work where tripartism and social dialogue are the keys in order to define the new challenges. Because the challenges, we've been talking about trade union organizations, but the challenges are also on the side of the employers' organizations. If we think about the gig economy, and if we think about the employers who are in the gig economy, are they going to become members of the traditional employers' organizations? And if we think about the governments, are they ready in terms of their capacities as competent labor administration to regulate and to monitor and to inspect the new forms of organizing work? So this is not something that one can do without the other. I think social dialogue and tripartism are more than ever fundamental in order to define the new challenges and the answers to those new challenges in the context of the future of work.
So finding a solution to this is in everybody's interests, right?
Yes, that's what this all is about, joining interests. But I think there's one thing that we need to underline. Social dialogue needs continuous practice. It needs continuous work. We have had periods when we haven't had social dialogue. Tripartism was actually only an international phenomenon in the 1920s and 1930s. It is after the Second World War that we have really got into tripartite cooperation at the national level. And we know that the so-called welfare state was basically built on tripartite negotiations. But if you look at the way in which all the independent countries after decolonization started building up their economies, you see that there is an input from employers and workers. There is a lot of tripartism which it continues to be alive. And this is where, when we now have this discussion on how much members do trade unions have in industrialized countries, we forget that it's not the numbers alone. The numbers were never as high as they were in communist countries where people were forced to be members of trade unions. This is genuine trade unionism, and who else speaks for the workers than the trade unions?
I think we have to leave it there. Kari and Maria Helena, thank you very much. And a reminder that if you want to know more about tripartism and its history in the ILO and some of the work that the ILO has done, Kari's book is now available in the ILO's bookshop. Now, it's time for our second look at the ILO's work on the ground. And this time, we're going to have a look at the work to eliminate child labour in Madagascar.
In 2018, there were nearly 152 million child labourers worldwide. 73 million were working at jobs that put their health, their safety, and their development at risk. Antsirabe is a town of 200,000 inhabitants, south of Madagascar's capital, Antananarivo. It attracts many poor families who send their children there to work in dangerous jobs, for example in brickyards, or as domestic workers. Nivo is 16. She left her family several years ago to take a job as a domestic worker in Antsirabe. From dawn to dusk, she does all the housework and also looks after the family's livestock. She works for long hours every day of the week. She has never gone to school and can't read or write.
I'll always work as a servant like this because I'm illiterate. There's nothing but this.
To avoid situations like this, the International Labour Organization set up a program that helps child domestic workers change their status and gain access to training. The program is run in close cooperation with the authorities and the Labour Inspectorate. Despite their limited means for action, the inspectors conduct daily visits to the town's cheap eateries. It doesn't take them long to come across a case of child labour. Despite the owner's confused explanations, it is clear to the inspectors that this 12-year-old girl is not going to school and spends her days working in the restaurant.
She's afraid of the repercussions, so she's not telling the truth about her real situation. So we encourage children to know their rights and encourage the employer to obey the law.
In partnership with a local association, Serobedi, the ILO program has provided skills training to almost 200 children, informed 2,000 others about their rights, and removed 2,500 from their jobs as child labourers. The ILO program has completely changed 17-year-old Hortensia's life. The 2 years she spent working in a private home as a domestic worker were a nightmare. Working non-stop and without help, her meager wages were barely enough to buy food, clothes, or medical care. During her training, she learned the basics of animal husbandry and agriculture. Now she's renting a plot of land where she grows vegetables. She's also raising the piglet she received from the project at the end of her training. Her family is very proud of her.
It was poverty that made us send her out to work. But if she was really suffering, like she told us, it's better to have her back with us.
We are often told we send our children out to work because we're poor. Every project tackling child labour has an awareness-raising component, so the ILO has been getting the message out that it's time to look at things the other way around. You're poor because you send your children out.
Education and poverty reduction measures are essential for fighting child labour. For Hortensia and the other young beneficiaries of the Serobedi Association, dance and song are a means of turning towards the future and ensuring that their past as child labourers is just a bad memory.
That was a video looking at an ILO project in Madagascar to tackle child labor. Now we're going to talk about another very important issue that the ILO deals with. In about a few minutes, actually, the second thematic discussion is going to start in the Human Rights Chamber, where we actually started this show. It's going to be on freedom of association and collective bargaining as a foundation of decent work. And back with us is Beata Andres, the chief of the Fundamental Principles and Rights of Work branch of the ILO. Welcome back to the show. Beata, thank you for taking the time in such a busy days. Can you tell us a little bit about what's planned for this second thematic discussion, which begins in a few minutes?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, and really thank you for giving some space to one of the core principles, actually the core enabling right of this organization, the freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining. And as we just saw this movie on Madagascar, I think it is also important to highlight that freedom of association, collective bargaining is very much related to other fundamental rights like child labor. And we will see this today in the afternoon, where we have a very impressive lineup of speakers from the workers organizations, employers organizations, from government. We will have the labor minister from Tunisia there, but also very uniquely, I think, an opportunity to engage with the representatives of the ILO supervisory system. It's really the first time I can remember in recent times, at least, that we brought them all together, from the Committee of Experts on the Application of Standards, from the Committee on the Application of Standards, the CAS, as well as the Committee on the Freedom of Association. And I think it's a really great opportunity to hear from them how the ILO supervisory system over the years has contributed to promoting freedom of association and the effective right to collective bargaining.
Absolutely. The ILO supervisory system, I find it to be a fascinating mechanism. And if you want to know more about it, if you go to the ILO website, there's a wealth of information of how it works and the different parts that make it up. Now, Beata, you rightly said that freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining is one of the four key principles that were identified in the so-called 1998 declaration. Can you tell us about a bit more about this key 1998 declaration of the ILO?
Yes, we actually celebrated its 20th anniversary last year. Martin, you will remember this, and we launched the book, The Teeth of the ILO, which is also available on the ILO website. But what you can see from this book, but also from the last 21 years now, is that the discussion on what was called core labor standards at the time has really evolved. In the 1990s, as you know, it took place against the backdrop of intensified globalization and a discussion how social standards could possibly be integrated in trade agreements. And then the discussion came back to the ILO, eventually led to the adoption of the 1998 declaration, which in the first place is an aspirational and political instrument, as the other declarations that have been adopted before. But very interestingly, the 1998 declaration has actually a follow-up mechanism. And this follow-up mechanism really, I believe, made the difference in recent years because it combined the supervisory function, including uniquely for countries that have not ratified any of the fundamental conventions related to freedom of association, collective bargaining, child labor, forced labor, and discrimination at work. But also promoted development cooperation, active engagement, the development of statistics, data, together with governments, workers' organizations and employers, and many partners of the ILO. And I think really when you look at this combination of the supervisory system of the ILO, which is in itself already something very unique, and our capacity to actually change things on the ground, you can really see how we've made a difference in many countries around the world, in recent times but also in history.
This business about making a difference on the ground, this is actually crucial, isn't it? Because principles are one thing, but practical change is another. Now, I think in the thematic forum this afternoon, you've highlighting quite a few examples of success stories. For those of our viewers who can't be attending the forum this afternoon, do you want to give a couple of examples of where these principles have made a real difference to societies and individuals?
Yes, we have produced a little film which we will show this afternoon and which will also be available for those who cannot participate. And the examples we've highlighted in this movie, I think some are of course well known. The ILO supervisory system, in particular the issue on freedom of association, collective bargaining, played a key role in bringing an end to the apartheid regime in South Africa. And of course the workers' movement was at the core of this, but it also led eventually to the establishment of multiracial employers organizations. So I think it's a very interesting example. We also look at Poland, where with Solidarność and Lech Walesa, we had for the first time the recognition of a self-governed trade union in the Eastern Bloc. All this later on, of course, paved the way also for the creation of independent employers organizations in those former communist countries. We also highlight Nicaragua in the 1980s, where the issue was in particular freedom of association affecting employers, and where some of the employers' representatives were imprisoned, and because of ILO pressure, they were later released. And we look at a more recent example, which is Panama, where we have seen the first collective bargaining agreement in the public sector. Just a few, I'm sure the speakers will bring many more examples, so I don't want to take more of this, but I think that's absolutely important to look at what happens at the country level.
No, we don't want to give away all your secrets in advance for this afternoon. But one thing that I think a lot of people would want to know is, do these principles play out differently in developed and developing countries?
Well, first of all, the principles and the rights enshrined in those conventions apply to all workers in all countries, regardless of whether the countries have ratified Convention number 87 and 98, and also, very importantly, to all workers, whether they are a citizen of this country or not. So I think this is the uniqueness of this. Yes. Yeah. So I think the idea that these fundamental human rights really apply to all workers, whether they are in an informal or informal employment relationship, whether they are a citizen of a particular country or not, that's really the important idea of the 1998 Declaration. And I think it's really, as the author of the book last year said, the teeth also of this instrument.
I think we have time for one more question, and one of the key topics in this conference is obviously the future of work. I want to ask you about the institutions that exist nowadays to promote and support freedom of association. Do we have the adequate institutions right now to deal with the emerging issues that we see in the future of work and freedom of association?
Well, we've heard from the Future of Work Commission the challenges that are ahead of us, the technology changing forms of work, and the employment relationship itself, climate change, very importantly, which I actually just had the opportunity to discuss with one of the workers' representatives here at the conference. So I think those are all issues that are of key concern to workers' and employers' organizations, and or will become in future years. And it's not new. I mean, we are, this whole idea of social dialogue, of tripartism, has seen many forms and evolutions over the years. So I think we should not be afraid of the future, but we should, as the Director General said, take our choices and determine the way to move forward. And I think the workers and employers organizations, and also in the ILO, ACTRAF, ACTEMP, have done very interesting work already to look at the whole issue of representation, of organizing in the 21st century. What does the new social contract look like? How do we organize workers in the gig economy? There are fascinating examples out there already from which we can learn. How will workers engage with artificial intelligence concretely at the factory level and elsewhere? I think the method of the ILO, as we heard also here during the conference, will rest valid and will, I believe, continue to be absolutely core and central to what we do. And it's important to understand that the promotion and recognition of the rights and principles enshrined in the freedom of association collective bargaining conventions, they are the foundation. Without those rights, you won't have effective social dialogue and tripartism. So that will, I think, also be the message this afternoon from the thematic forum.
Yes, thank you. We have to leave it there because we haven't got a lot of time left on the show. But thank you very much to Beata. And if you want to know more about this subject, you can join the thematic forum via the website, via the webcast. It comes straight after the Daily Show in a few minutes' time. Now, as you know, it's the ILO's 100th year this year. One of our great supporters on fundamental principles and rights has been the Nobel Peace Laureate Kailash Satyarthi. He has very kindly sent us a message for our 100th centenary.
My dear sisters and brothers at ILO, I would like to congratulate you for 100th anniversary. I feel ILO headquarters are like my home, and the ILO fraternity as my friends and family. It is not just because there is a sculpture of Global March Against Child Labor situated in front of ILO building, but also because inside the building I have so many sisters and brothers and friends, including the Director General Guy Ryder. My relationship with ILO goes back when I brought this issue of child bonded labor in South Asia to ILO in 1989. And then when I was fighting to end child labor in carpet industry and seeking help from German government and parliament, I was the part of ideation, conceptualization, and the initial formation of a new program which was later on hosted by ILO, and that is IPAC program. We worked hand in hand for a new international legislation, Convention on the Worst Forms of Child Labor. And we succeeded it in unanimous adoption in 1998. But before that, when we planned to organize the Global March Against Child Labor, ILO was the first strong partner and ally. And during the execution of the march, we marched together across 103 countries. Then there were times when IPAC faced some problems of funding. I tried my best to work with my friends like Senator Tom Harkin in United States, but also in many more countries, that there should not be paucity of funding in IPAC program. We worked also closely later on for the speedy ratification of Convention 182, and that has become the fastest ever ratified convention. If we have to create a sustainable, inclusive, equitable and peaceful world, we need much more stronger cohesion and coordination among all major stakeholders, and primarily the ILO's tripartite bodies, employers, employees and governments. And of course the civil society organizations could be a major partner. We live in a world where 152 million children are working as child laborers, and on the other hand 200 million adults are jobless. So every single child is working at the cost of one adult job, and we need the leadership of ILO. Under the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2030, we are committed to create at least 600 million new jobs. So ILO has to play an important role in it. 780 million women and men are not able to lift themselves from the poverty line. They cannot earn more than $2 a day. So we need ILO now more than ever. More bigger challenges are ahead, like millions of people displaced due to global warming, climate change and conflicts. So they are not only losing their livelihoods, but they are ending up in subhuman conditions of slavery, trafficking and child labor. We have to see that how they can get decent jobs where all the human rights and ILO conventions are properly implemented. We have to also see that how the young people could be given skills which are appropriate to the challenges of the future. May it be the information technology or artificial intelligence or robotic industrialization or augmented realities and so on. Young people have to feel that they are not unsafe. They will get jobs in the future. So the need of creating more employability, entrepreneurship and skill is very much needed. We have to make sure that there should not be any disparity or inequality in workplaces due to ethnicity, nationality, gender, disability, etc., etc. So this is another future challenge. I'm sure that we can do it together. Can make this world and will make this world which is more compassionate, peaceful, sustainable and just. Thank you so much.
That was a special message from the Nobel Peace Prize winner Kailash Satyarthi on the occasion of the ILO centenary. Now, before we end, as we said earlier in the show, the first thematic panel that took place this morning was on child labor, and right after that, one of our colleagues, Sandra Kuchen, managed to talk to Secretary General from Amnesty, Secretary General Naidu, about the issue of child labor and his message to the ILC. Let's take a look.
I have the great pleasure today of interviewing Kumi Naidu, who is the Secretary General of Amnesty International. But his career has actually taken him since the age of 15 on human rights and social justice campaigns at many organizations. It's a great pleasure to talk with you today.
Thank you, and it's a great pleasure to be at the ILO's 100th anniversary.
And today we mark the World Day Against Child Labor with a thematic forum looking at child labor, at which you gave a keynote address. And I'm just curious, what are some ideas that gave you food for thought at the thematic forum?
Well, listening to the other participants, especially some of the younger people, I take away this message that we need to stop actually seeing young people as the leaders of tomorrow. We actually need to see them as the leaders of today. Because actually, if young people wait to take leadership tomorrow, there might not be a tomorrow with the reality of climate, and that is why it's so inspiring, for example, to see Greta Thunberg and the Fridays of the Future movement mobilizing young people and showing that young people have power. So I think what I found very important here was understanding that there are two sides to the struggle, which is one is how do we get people out of child labor who are in child labor already, and how do we prevent people from getting there in the first place. Now this might sound like an obvious thing, but I think what you need for these two things are not exactly the same. And so I'm inspired to see that it is young people who are also contributing to the solutions. I was very moved by my Ugandan sister, and she told a story about being working in a tea plantation, how she came out of it, and how today she's working to support other children who are in child labor. I also, on the more cautious side, take away from a forum like we've just had is that we got to be very, very clear that getting a convention signed, hard work as it might be, is actually not even the conclusion of the first step. Because the first step we should see as governments putting in place capacity, policies, people, resources to implement whatever is decided. So I think I would urge that while it's good to take time to celebrate when we reach a milestone like getting consensus of every country in the world signing on, that doesn't happen often this day and age, so we should celebrate it, but we should be cautious of premature triumphalism and to recognize that much more work is needed to ensure that the convention lives through implementation at the national level in all countries in the world.
And When you gave your keynote speech, what was your main message that you were trying to get across?
The main message I was trying to get across is that child labor is a manifestation of a bigger problem rather than it being a problem that just organically just emerges in the world. That in fact, what is critically missing today is an honest assessment of how deeply challenged humanity is. I mean, we've just had, in October last year, the climate scientists tell us we've got 12 years to get emissions to peak and start coming down before in the route to catastrophic irreversible climate change. Put differently, 12 years, actually now 11 years, before in the route to extinction for the overwhelming majority, right? And I think that we have to connect the dots much more than we do because, for example, child labor exists because people in powerful positions often are seeking to maximize profits. Part of that maximization of profit is breeding overconsumption. Part of the implication of overconsumption is inequality and climate impacts. And so I think my message was really understand that child labor is a manifestation of an economic system and economic policies that has failed the majority, and that there has to be a greater responsibility to those that have benefited from the system, that the rich should be willing to be much more generous, and if not, should be taxed to be more generous to help the problems that humanity is facing right now, and that we shouldn't see child labor in an isolated way from other intersecting struggles. So for example, if you take, because children exist in every community, right? So if you are talking about gender equality, then there's an intersection between young girls and gender equality. So I think being able to find the intersections between different struggles and different constituencies gives us more ability to win for everybody. And even though I didn't say it in my speech, the message was, even us in civil society, we have got siloed in our approach, and we don't make some obvious connections that we should be making, which would support, I believe, all the different struggles. And so yes, specialization is important, but sometimes there's a very thin line between specialization and parochialism.
You talked about a crisis of imagination in terms of how we address challenges like labor exploitation of children, and even on greater other issues as well. And I was really taken by that idea of a crisis of imagination. And what kind of creativity do you think that we're going to need to rethink how we're doing things?
The kind of creativity we need now has to be of a scale that humanity has never seen before. We have to redesign our energy system to ensure that we have an economy that's driven by clean, green, renewable energy rather than dirty, brown, fossil fuel-based energy. We have to come to terms that the level of inequality that exists in the world is completely unsustainable and has to be addressed on a finite planet. We have to address the fact that gender equality, there's been so much of struggles, but yes, there's progress, but it's after so much of sacrifice and struggle, is this the best we can do? So with all of these, when I talk about innovation and transformative thinking, I am personally inspired by some wisdom that got lost in the mid-1960s from Martin Luther King, when he said in a speech, and I'm quoting him now, "My friends, as I come to the end of my speech, I want to note that in the field of modern child psychology, there's a very dominant term called maladjusted. Now, all of us want to be well-adjusted and not suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. But my friends, I say to you, there are certain things in our world that are so unjust and immoral that good, decent people should refuse to be well-adjusted to." Then he goes on to say, "I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry, racial discrimination." I'm sure you would have said child labor, or would have meant child labor. And importantly, he said, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few when millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society." Now, in a longer version of the speech, he actually calls for the setting up of a new global movement to be known as the International Association for the Advancement of Creative Maladjustment. Right? And I want to suggest that that's the kind of innovation, because we have adjusted to far too, and when I say we, I mean even civil society activists have adjusted to inequality, to ways of being and functioning, and all of these things that we just shouldn't have. So like, for example, when civil society people come to UN events or engage with the national governments, we often think about it as, we have influence. That's why actually we need to, for example, on our side, make a distinction between access versus influence. Just because you have access to forums like this or at the national level does not necessarily mean you have influence. Just because you speak does not mean that you are heard, right? So we need to be taking into account that we live in a world where we've seen now a convergence of crisis in a very short, concentrated time, and the main innovation we need is to stop treating poverty, environment, human rights, climate, and so on as disconnected, because fundamentally they're all connected, and there will never be the possibility of innovation if we do not take a lesson from the feminist movement when they preached decades ago the critical need for intersectionality, which was basically understanding how different struggles are connected. And I think we need an intersectional approach which will get us more closer to innovation. And I think right now, if we look at who are coming up with the most brightest ideas, the most creative ideas, the most passionate forms of resistance to injustice, it's young people. And we have to, I believe, if we're going to get the right kind of innovation, is create more space for young people to have a much larger voice than they currently have, because they are looking at the world with freshness in their lenses. People like me are looking at the world with like 5 decades behind us, and some even more. And as my daughter says to me, Dad, your generation are contaminated by bad experience, and you're constantly pushing a bad experience on us. And I think young people must be given the space to imagine in different ways, co-create the future that they want, because the bottom line is, it is their generation that are going to pay the consequences of the failure of leadership in this moment of history.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
There was Secretary General Naidu from Amnesty International talking to our colleague Sandra Kuchen. Sophie.
Thanks, Martin. Okay, let's just have a quick look at what's going on the rest of this afternoon here at the ILC. At 3 o'clock, we have the second of our thematic panels starting. That is on freedom of association and collective bargaining. If you want to join that, you can do that via the webcast. It starts almost immediately after we finish this show. Now, tomorrow is another packed day at the ILC. The thematic panel is on skills for a brighter future, and we have some amazing guests attending that. We have Christine Lagarde, the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Michelle Bachelet, who is the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Filippo Grandi, who's the head of the Refugee Agency, UNHCR, and Angel Gurria, who's head of the OECD. Now, we have interviews with all or some of those on The Daily Show tomorrow, so join us then. In addition, we will have live guests talking about youth employment, skills, and in particular, skills for green jobs. So if you want to ask any questions on any of those 3 topics, please tweet us. The hashtag is behind me, hashtag ILO100 or OIT100. So we hope to get some questions for you for that. So that's it for today's Daily Show. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you'll be able to join us again tomorrow. My name is Sophie Fisher, and with me is Martin Murphy. Goodbye.